When my daughter Sarah called me crying, begging me to delete every trace of myself from the internet because strangers were threatening our family, I believed her without question. A mother's instinct is to protect her child, so I spent 3 agonizing days erasing 15 years of memories from Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But when I accidentally stumbled onto a website selling intimate photos of me to strangers for profit, I realized the real threat wasn't coming from outside our family. It was sitting across from me at Sunday dinners, smiling while she turned my life into her personal goldmine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 57 years old, I thought I understood the internet reasonably well. I wasn't one of those older people who feared technology or refused to adapt to the digital age. I had a modest following on Instagram where I shared my watercolor paintings, a Facebook account where I kept in touch with old college friends, and a Twitter account I barely used but maintained anyway. Nothing excessive, nothing embarrassing, just the normal digital footprint of someone who'd been online since the early days of social media. My daughter Sarah was 32, worked in digital marketing, and had always been the tech-savvy one in our family. After her father Michael died 4 years ago from a sudden heart attack, Sarah and I had grown closer than we'd been since she was a child. She'd call me almost daily, visit every weekend, and include me in her life in ways that filled the hollow space Michael's death had left behind. I felt blessed to have such a devoted daughter, especially when so many of my friends complained about their adult children being too busy or distant. That's why I didn't question it when Sarah showed up at my townhouse in Portland on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March, her face pale and her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. I'd been in my studio working on a commission piece, a watercolor landscape for a client in Seattle, when I heard her key in the lock. She had a spare key for emergencies, and the fact that she'd used it in the middle of a workday immediately set off alarm bells. Sarah stood in my doorway looking nothing like the confident marketing professional I knew. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her makeup smeared as though she'd been crying, and her normally perfect hair hung limp around her face. She looked like she'd aged 5 years since I'd seen her the previous Sunday. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking on the single word. "We need to talk. It's serious." I immediately set down my paintbrush, my heart rate accelerating with the kind of maternal panic that never fully goes away no matter how old your children get. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is it work?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "It's worse than that. So much worse. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks, but I can't put it off anymore. You're in danger, Mom. We both are." The words sent ice through my veins. Danger? What kind of danger? Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling hands and showed me a series of screenshots. They appeared to be messages from anonymous social media accounts, crude and threatening messages directed at her. Some threatened violence, others made sexual comments, and several contained personal information like her home address and workplace. "I've been dealing with this for 3 months," she explained, her voice shaking. "Ever since I worked on that campaign for the women's rights organization. There's this group of men online who've been targeting women in advertising who work on feminist campaigns. They're called doxers. They find everything they can about you and use it to terrorize you." I felt my stomach turn as I read through the vile messages. Who would do something like this? "Have you gone to the police?" The police can't do anything unless they make an actual physical threat, and these guys are smart about staying just on the legal side of harassment. "But Mom," she grabbed my hands, her eyes wide with fear, "they found you. They know you're my mother. They've been commenting on your Instagram posts, saving your photos, talking about you in their forums." She showed me more screenshots, this time of my own Instagram posts. Innocent photos of my paintings, pictures of my garden, a selfie I'd posted from a hiking trip with my friend Patricia. Underneath each one were comments from accounts with strange names and no profile pictures. Comments that ranged from benign observations about my appearance to suggestions about what they'd like to do if they met me. I hadn't even noticed them because I rarely checked my Instagram comments anymore. "They're building profiles on you," Sarah continued. "They know where you live, where you go to church, what grocery store you shop at. They figured all of this out from your social media posts. Mom, you have to delete everything. Right now. It's the only way to protect yourself." I stared at the screenshots, feeling violated in a way I'd never experienced before. The idea that strangers were collecting information about me, studying my life, making crude comments about my appearance. It made my skin crawl. But delete everything? 15 years of memories? Sarah must have seen my hesitation because she gripped my hands tighter. Mom, I know it's hard. I know those accounts mean something to you. But these men are dangerous. One woman they targeted ended up having a brick thrown through her window. Another had someone show up at her workplace. I can't let that happen to you. Please. You have to trust me on this. The desperation in her voice, the genuine fear in her eyes, it all felt so real. This was my daughter, my only child, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. If she said I was in danger, then I believed her. What do I need to do? I asked quietly. Relief flooded Sarah's face. Delete your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of them. Don't just deactivate them. Fully delete them so the content can't be recovered. Change your phone number. Stop using your email address and set up a new one. Basically, disappear from the internet as much as possible. The scope of what she was asking felt overwhelming. But what about my art clients? They contact me through Instagram. And my friends from college, Facebook is how we stay connected. I'll help you reach out to your clients directly and give them your new contact information. And your real friends will understand. Mom, please. I'm scared. These people are serious and they've already proven they can find anything online. Looking at my daughter's terrified face, I made a decision that would haunt me for months to come. All right, I said. Show me how to delete everything. We spent the next 3 days systematically erasing my digital presence. Sarah walked me through the process of permanently deleting my Instagram account, which required a waiting period during which I couldn't log back in, or the deletion would be canceled. My Facebook account, which had been active since 2008 and contained thousands of photos and memories from family gatherings, vacations, and everyday moments with Michael before he died. My Twitter account that I barely used but had maintained for over a decade. Sarah also insisted I delete my LinkedIn profile, even though I'd been retired from my job as an art teacher for 5 years and hardly used it. You never know what information they might find there, she said. Better to be safe than sorry. The hardest part was going through my photo albums on my computer and external hard drives. Sarah convinced me that some of the photos, particularly ones that showed identifiable locations or included metadata with GPS coordinates, needed to be deleted entirely rather than just removed from social media. I felt like I was erasing parts of my own history. Photos of Michael and me on our 25th anniversary trip to Vancouver. Pictures of Sarah's college graduation. Snapshots from art exhibitions where I displayed my work. Each deletion felt like losing a small piece of myself, but Sarah's constant reassurance that this was necessary for my safety kept me going. By the end of those 3 days, I existed online in name only. A few old mentions on other people's social media posts that I had no control over. Some archived pages from art shows I participated in years ago. But my active digital presence was gone. I felt simultaneously safer and more isolated than I had in years. Sarah seemed to relax once it was done. She hugged me tightly before leaving that Friday evening. Thank you for trusting me, Mom. I know this was hard, but you did the right thing. These guys will lose interest once they can't find anything current on you. Just lay low for a while, okay? No posting photos anywhere. No joining new social media platforms. Just exist offline for now. I promised I would. And she left looking more at peace than she had in days. I tried to feel the same relief, but something nagged at the edges of my mind. A small voice that asked questions I didn't want to acknowledge. Why had those threatening comments on my Instagram been from accounts with no history? Why hadn't I received any direct threats to my email or phone? Why did this whole situation feel slightly off in ways I couldn't quite articulate? But I pushed those doubts down. Sarah was my daughter. She worked in digital marketing and understood the internet far better than I did. If she said I was in danger, then I was in danger. Questioning her would be questioning the bond between us, and after losing Michael, that bond was too precious to risk. For 6 weeks, I lived in a strange sort of digital silence. No scrolling through Facebook during my morning coffee. No posting pictures of my latest paintings on Instagram. No seeing what my friends were up to or sharing updates about my own life. I painted, I read, I went to church, I had lunch with Patricia, but I felt disconnected from the wider world in a way that became increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia noticed the change immediately. Where did you go? She asked during one of our weekly lunches at our favorite cafe downtown. You vanished from Facebook without a word. I thought something had happened to you. I explained the situation as Sarah had described it to me. The harassment campaign, the doxing, the need to protect myself by going offline. Patricia listened with a concerned expression, but when I finished, she looked puzzled rather than sympathetic. Margaret, that's terrible, but wouldn't it make more sense to just make your accounts private? Or block the specific people harassing you? Completely deleting everything seems extreme. Sarah said it was the only way to be sure, I replied, feeling oddly defensive. These people are apparently very persistent. Patricia stirred her tea thoughtfully. I've heard about doxing and online harassment campaigns. It's awful. But usually the targets are people with large platforms or public profiles. You had, 300 followers on Instagram?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Most of them were your art students and friends from church. It just seemed strange that you become a target. Her words planted a seed of doubt that I tried to ignore. Maybe that's exactly why they targeted me. Because I'm vulnerable. Because I'm not tech-savvy enough to protect myself. But Patricia's skepticism stayed with me. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking more critically about the situation. I'd been so caught up in Sarah's fear and my own panic that I hadn't asked basic questions. Who exactly were these harassers? What was the name of this group? Had Sarah actually reported them to the police despite their supposed inability to help? What specific campaign had she worked on that triggered this response? I decided to do a little research. Without my own social media accounts, I created a generic email address and used it to set up a barebones Facebook profile with a fake name. I felt slightly ridiculous, like a spy in a low-budget thriller, but I needed to understand what I was supposedly being protected from. I searched for information about online harassment campaigns targeting women in advertising. I found plenty of articles about real cases, which confirmed that Sarah's story was plausible. But when I tried to search for recent campaigns or cases involving the specific women's rights organization Sarah had mentioned, I came up empty. I also tried to find Sarah's professional portfolio online. She'd always been proud of her work, and before I deleted my social media, I remembered seeing her post about various campaigns she'd been involved in. But now I couldn't find any recent work credited to her name. At least nothing involving women's rights organizations or anything that might trigger the kind of response she described. Maybe I was looking in the wrong places. Maybe the campaign hadn't been publicized widely. Maybe I was being paranoid and distrustful of my own daughter for no reason. But the questions kept multiplying in my mind, and I couldn't quite silence them anymore. Then, 2 months after I deleted my social media presence, something happened that changed everything. I was at Patricia's house helping her organize her late husband's book collection when her teenage grandson Tyler stopped by. He was 17, perpetually attached to his phone, and possessed the kind of casual tech fluency that made people my age feel ancient. Tyler flopped onto Patricia's couch and started scrolling through his phone while Patricia and I worked. After a few minutes, he let out a low whistle. "Grandma, you know you can buy people's personal photos online now? So creepy. There are these websites that scrape photos from deleted social media accounts and sell access to them." My hands froze on the book I'd been shelving. "What do you mean, sell access to them?" Tyler looked up from his phone. "Yeah, it's this whole sketchy business. When people delete their Facebook or Instagram, they think the photos are gone, but sometimes they get archived by these data harvesting companies before deletion. Then these companies sell subscriptions to access the photos. It's technically legal but super unethical." Patricia had stopped organizing books and was watching Tyler with a disturbed expression. "Why would anyone want to buy someone else's old photos?" Tyler shrugged. "Lots of reasons, I guess. Some people use them to create fake profiles. Some are just creeps who want to look at photos of regular people. There was this whole investigative article about it last month. One woman found out her ex-husband was selling access to her family photos to strangers. Something cold settled in my stomach. Can you show me that article?" Tyler pulled it up on his phone and handed it to me. The article was from a reputable news source and detailed exactly what Tyler had described. A network of websites that specialized in recovering and selling access to deleted social media content. The woman featured in the article had discovered her photos on one such site, only after a friend accidentally stumbled across them while researching the phenomenon. The article listed several of these websites. Most of them had innocuous-sounding names that disguised their actual purpose. Photo Archive Plus, Memory Recovery Services, Digital Legacy Preservation. The article noted that while these sites claimed to offer a service for people who regretted deleting their accounts, they also attracted users with more sinister intentions. "Can I look something up on your phone?" I asked Tyler, my voice surprisingly steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "Sure," he said, looking curious about my sudden interest. I navigated to the first website listed in the article. It had a clean, professional design that made it look legitimate. The homepage advertised services for recovering lost photos from deleted social media accounts. For a monthly subscription fee, users could search for specific names and access archived content. My hands trembled as I typed my own name into the search bar. Margaret Chun, Portland, Oregon. The search results loaded and my heart stopped. There I was. Dozens of my Instagram photos, posts from my Facebook account, even some Twitter images I'd forgotten I'd posted. All of them archived and available for anyone willing to pay the subscription fee. But that wasn't the worst part. Next to the collection of my photos was a statistic that made my blood run cold. Downloaded by 83 users. My personal photos, images of my home, pictures of me and Michael, moments from my private life, had been downloaded 83 times by complete strangers. I felt Patricia's hand on my shoulder. "Margaret, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just turned the phone toward her so she could see the screen. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed I wasn't imagining this nightmare. "But why would your photos be on here?" Patricia asked. "You just deleted your accounts 2 months ago. These sites need time to harvest data before accounts are deleted. Unless someone uploaded them manually," Tyler said quietly. He'd come to look at the screen over my shoulder. "See that notation there? User submitted content. That means someone with access to your photos directly uploaded them to this site before you deleted your accounts. They probably even backdated them to make it look like they were harvested automatically." The room spun around me. Someone had deliberately taken my photos and uploaded them to this website. Someone who had access to my accounts or who I'd given my password to when I was deleting everything. Someone who knew I'd be deleting my social media presence and wanted to profit from it before I did. Sarah. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My daughter, who had been so insistent that I delete everything immediately. Who had helped me through the entire process and had access to all my accounts in those 3 days. Who worked in digital marketing and would understand exactly how these data harvesting sites operated. Who had created an elaborate story about online harassment to convince me to erase my digital presence so she could sell my archived photos to strangers. I felt Patricia's arms around me as my legs gave out and I sank into a chair. The betrayal was so profound, so incomprehensible, that my mind struggled to process it. My own daughter had turned me into a product, had commodified my life and my memories, had sold intimate moments of my existence to strangers for money. "Margaret, we need to call the police," Patricia said firmly. "This is fraud. This is identity theft. This is so many kinds of wrong." But I couldn't move. I could only stare at the screen showing my photos, my life, packaged and sold like merchandise, with my daughter's fingerprints all over the crime. Tyler, still holding his phone, was scrolling through something else. His face had gone pale. Mrs. Chun? I think you need to see this too." He showed me another website, this one even more disturbing than the first. It was marketed as a premium service, offering not just photos but compiled information packages on individuals. For a higher subscription fee, users could access comprehensive profiles including photos, known addresses, family connections, daily routines, and other personal information. My profile was there too, but this one was far more detailed. Someone had taken information from my deleted social media accounts and compiled it into a disturbingly thorough dossier. My home address, the church I attended, the cafe where Patricia and I had lunch every Tuesday, the park where I liked to paint, my daily routines laid out like an instruction manual for stalking. And at the bottom of my profile was a seller rating, 5 stars, with a note that read, "Comprehensive package. Subject deleted original accounts, making this archive especially valuable. Seller responsive and provided additional verification materials." would purchase from again. The seller username was Sarachan Marketing. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Maybe she thought I'd never find out. Maybe she assumed I was too technologically inept to discover what she'd done. Or maybe she simply didn't care because the money was more important than any remaining shred of dignity or conscience. How much? I whispered. How much did she sell me for? Tyler clicked through to the pricing information. The basic photo archive subscription was $15 per month. The premium information package was $50 per month. But there was also an option to purchase lifetime access to individual profiles. He scrolled down to my profile. Lifetime access was being offered for $200. As of that moment, 37 people had purchased it. She made $7,400, Tyler said quietly. Just from your profile alone. And she probably has others. $7,400. That's what my dignity, my privacy, my sense of safety was worth to my daughter. $7,400. Patricia was already dialing someone on her phone. Yes, I need to report a case of identity theft and fraud. No, the victim is right here with me. Yes, we have evidence. As Patricia spoke to the police, I sat frozen in that chair, still staring at my own face on Tyler's phone screen. 37 strangers had paid $200 each for permanent access to my life. They could look at photos of me whenever they wanted. They knew where I lived, where I went, what my routines were. And they'd gotten all of it because my daughter, the person I trusted most in the world after Michael died, had sold me out for profit. The police arrived within an hour. Detective James Morrison was a patient man in his mid-40s who listened carefully as I explained the situation, showing him the websites on Tyler's phone and the evidence of Sarah's involvement. His expression grew increasingly grim as I walked through how Sarah had convinced me to delete my social media accounts. Mrs. Chun, he said when I finished, I need to be straight with you. What your daughter did is illegal. This falls under identity theft, fraud, violation of privacy rights, and potentially computer crime statutes. But I need to ask you something important. Do you want to press charges against your own daughter? The question hung in the air between us. Did I want to press charges? Did I want to put Sarah in legal jeopardy? She was my only child, my only family now that Michael was gone. Could I really do that to her? But then I thought about those 37 strangers who had permanent access to my photos. I thought about the 83 people who had downloaded my images. I thought about the profile that laid out my daily routines for anyone willing to pay. I thought about the elaborate lies Sarah had constructed, the tears she'd faked, the fear she'd manufactured to manipulate me into making myself vulnerable. Yes, I said firmly. I want to press charges. Detective Morrison nodded. We'll need to document everything. We'll also need to contact these websites and potentially other law enforcement agencies, since this likely crosses state lines. Mrs. Chun, I want you to prepare yourself for something. Cases like this rarely involve just one victim. If your daughter did this to you, she's probably done it to others. His words proved more accurate than I could have imagined. Over the next 72 hours, Detective Morrison and his team uncovered an operation that was far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. Sarah hadn't just targeted me. She'd been running this scheme for at least 18 months, systematically identifying vulnerable targets and manipulating them into deleting their social media presence, so she could profit from their archived content. The police discovered Sarah had created multiple seller accounts across different platforms, each using slight variations of her name or professional credentials. Sarachan Marketing was just one of at least 7 identities she'd been operating under. Through these accounts, she'd sold access to the private photos and personal information of 43 different individuals. Detective Morrison sat across from me in my living room 3 days after I'd filed the initial report. A thick folder of documents spread across my coffee table. The scope of what he was showing me made my earlier shock seem almost quaint in comparison. Mrs. Chun, he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty. Your daughter has been very methodical about this. She specifically targeted older adults, mostly women, who had active social media presences but limited technical knowledge. She used different manipulation tactics depending on the victim, but the core strategy remained consistent. He showed me a spreadsheet that his team had compiled. 43 names, ages ranging from 52 to 78, all women except for 3 men. Next to each name was a brief description of the manipulation tactics Sarah had used. For some victims, she'd used the same approach she'd used on me. Fake harassment campaigns, manufactured threats, urgent pleas for safety. For others, she'd posed as a concerned privacy consultant offering free services. For several, she'd claimed to work for Facebook or Instagram directly, warning them about security breaches that required immediate account deletion. One woman, Detective Morrison explained, pointing to a name on the list, was told her late husband's identity was being used in a catfishing scheme, and that she needed to delete all photos of him to prevent further misuse. Another was convinced her grandchildren were being targeted by predators who were using family photos to gather information. Each story was tailored to exploit a specific fear or vulnerability. Sarah had clearly researched her targets, understanding what would motivate them to act quickly without questioning her too deeply. But how did she even find these people? I asked, my voice hollow. How did she know who to target? Detective Morrison pulled out another document. This is where it gets particularly disturbing. Your daughter was part of several online communities focused on digital marketing and data monetization. In these communities, members share strategies for identifying valuable data sources and methods for acquiring content. We found chat logs where Sarah discussed her various targets, what she called them, with other members of these groups. He showed me printed screenshots of conversations that made my stomach turn. Sarah discussing me by name, referring to me as the sentimental widow with quality content. She'd shared details about my personality, my habits, my weaknesses. She'd even posted photos of me without my knowledge, asking the group to rate whether I'd be a profitable target. The group had encouraged her enthusiastically. One member had written, "Older widows are perfect. They're isolated, trusting, and they have years of content. Plus they usually don't have anyone who'll notice or care enough to investigate." That comment hurt almost as much as Sarah's betrayal itself. The casual dismissal of people like me as targets precisely because we were perceived as alone and unlikely to be protected. The calculated cruelty of it. Did she do this alone? I asked. Or were there others actively helping her? The detective's expression grew even more serious. That's what makes this case complicated. We believe Sarah worked with at least 2 other individuals who helped her harvest and upload the content, manage the seller accounts, and launder the money she was making. One of them is a web developer named Marcus Torres, who created customized scraping tools for her. The other is a woman named Jennifer Hartley, who helped with the actual manipulation of targets and managed some of the fake social media accounts used in the harassment campaigns. So there was a whole team of people doing this, treating real human beings like products to be harvested and sold? Detective Morrison nodded grimly. It's more common than you'd think, unfortunately. The market for personal data has exploded in recent years, and the legal framework hasn't kept pace. What Sarah and her associates were doing exists in a gray area where some of it is technically legal, while other aspects clearly cross into criminal territory. What happens now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Now we build a case. We've already executed a search warrant on Sarah's apartment and her workplace. We've seized her computers, phones, and financial records. We're working with the FBI since this crosses state lines and involves interstate commerce. We're also coordinating with some of the websites where she sold this content to have it removed, though that process is complicated by jurisdictional issues. And Sarah? Where is she now? We brought her in for questioning yesterday. She's been released on bail pending formal charges, but she's not allowed to contact you or any of the other victims. She's also prohibited from accessing the internet except for essential work purposes, which is being monitored. The idea of Sarah being questioned by police, of her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, should have brought me some satisfaction. Instead, I just felt empty. This was my daughter. The baby I'd carried for 9 months, the toddler who'd clung to my leg on her first day of preschool, the teenager who'd sobbed in my arms after her first heartbreak. How had that person become someone capable of such calculated cruelty? Mrs. Chan, Detective Morrison said gently, I need to prepare you for what comes next. When cases like this go public, and they will, there's often media attention. You may be contacted by reporters. Other victims will likely want to connect with you. And at some point, you'll need to decide whether you want to participate in the criminal proceedings, or if you prefer to remain as anonymous as possible. I want to participate, I said immediately. If my testimony can help convict her and prevent her from doing this to anyone else, Then I'll do whatever is necessary." The detective looked relieved. "That's good to hear, because the prosecutor is going to need victim testimony to make the strongest case possible. But I also want you to consider connecting with some of the other victims. Many of them are struggling with the same feelings you're experiencing. There's power in knowing you're not alone." He handed me a piece of paper with an email address. "This is a support group that's been formed for victims of privacy exploitation and identity theft. They meet virtually every week. I think you'd find it helpful." After Detective Morrison left, I sat alone in my living room staring at that email address. Part of me wanted to retreat into isolation, to deal with this betrayal privately without exposing myself further. But another part of me recognized that isolation was exactly what had made me vulnerable in the first place. After Michael died, I'd pulled back from many of my friendships, relying heavily on Sarah for emotional connection. That dependence had made me the perfect target. I sent an email to the support group that evening. Within an hour, I received a response from the group facilitator, a woman named Dr. Elena Rodriguez who specialized in counseling victims of digital crimes. She invited me to join their next virtual meeting the following Tuesday. That Tuesday evening, I logged into the video call feeling nervous and exposed. There were 12 other people in the virtual room, their faces arranged in small squares on my screen. Dr. Rodriguez welcomed me warmly and asked if I wanted to share my story with the group. I did, haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence as I saw recognition and understanding in the faces watching me. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before several people began to speak at once, each wanting to share their own experiences. A woman named Dorothy, who appeared to be in her early 70s, told us how her grandson had convinced her to delete all her social media accounts by claiming her posts were interfering with his job applications. She later discovered he'd been selling her archived content, including photos of her late husband who'd been a minor celebrity in their community. The photos were being used to create fake memorial pages that solicited donations for fictitious charities. A man named Robert described how his adult son had gained access to his accounts by claiming he needed to help his father improve his privacy settings. Instead, the son had systematically downloaded every photo and piece of personal information before deleting the accounts himself and telling his father it was for his own protection. The stories went on, each one a variation on the same theme of trust betrayed and privacy violated by the people who should have been most protective of us. What struck me most was the common thread of isolation that ran through every account. We'd all been somewhat alone, either through death, divorce, or geographical distance from other family members. That isolation had made us dependent on the very people who exploited us. But sitting in that virtual room, listening to these strangers share their pain and their resilience, I felt something I hadn't felt since discovering Sarah's betrayal. I felt connected, not alone, part of a community that understood exactly what I was going through because they'd survived it themselves. Dr. Rodriguez spoke after we'd all shared our stories. What each of you experienced is a profound violation of trust. These weren't strangers who targeted you. These were people you loved, people you'd cared for and supported, people who held intimate knowledge of your vulnerabilities. The betrayal trauma you're experiencing is compounded by the familial relationship, and it's important to acknowledge that grief. Her words gave me permission to mourn, not just for what Sarah had done but for the relationship I'd thought we had. I'd been so focused on the practical aspects of the crime that I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel the emotional devastation of losing my daughter, not to death but to her own choices. Over the following weeks, I attended the support group every Tuesday without fail. Between meetings, I exchanged emails with Dorothy and several others, forming connections that felt more genuine than my relationship with Sarah had been in years. These were people who understood what it meant to have your life commodified, to discover you'd been reduced to a product worth a specific dollar amount in someone else's calculations. The criminal case against Sarah moved forward with surprising speed. The evidence was overwhelming. The police had found detailed records on her computer documenting every victim, every transaction, every dollar earned. She'd kept meticulous spreadsheets tracking which profiles were most profitable, which websites paid the best commissions, which types of content generated the most downloads. What struck me most when Detective Morrison showed me these records was the clinical detachment of it all. There was no indication in her notes that she saw us as human beings. We were inventory, data sets, revenue streams, My profile was labeled MW002, which I later learned stood for Mature Widow Number 2. The first mature widow she'd exploited was a woman named Helen Pritchard, whose husband had died just 6 months before mine. Helen and I connected through the support group, discovering we had more in common than just being Sarah's victims. We'd both been married for over 30 years, both lost our husbands suddenly, both struggled with the adjustment to widowhood. In another timeline, we might have been friends brought together by shared experience. Instead, we'd been brought together by shared exploitation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late June, 3 months after I'd discovered what Sarah had done. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rebecca Walsh, met with me several times to prepare my testimony. She explained that Sarah's defense attorney would likely try to portray her as a struggling businesswoman who'd made poor ethical choices, rather than a calculating predator who'd targeted vulnerable people. They'll try to paint you as overly sensitive, Rebecca warned me during one of our preparation sessions. They'll suggest that what Sarah did, while perhaps inappropriate, didn't actually harm you in any tangible way. They'll minimize the violation by arguing that you'd already shared these photos publicly on social media, so you'd forfeited any reasonable expectation of privacy. But I didn't forfeit anything, I protested. I deleted those accounts specifically to protect my privacy. Sarah manipulated me into doing that so she could profit from it. I know that, and the law knows that, but juries can be swayed by smooth arguments about the nature of public versus private information online. We need to make sure they understand the human cost of what Sarah did, not just the legal technicalities. Rebecca coached me on how to testify, how to stay calm when Sarah's attorney tried to rattle me, how to focus on the facts while still conveying the emotional impact. She also warned me that I'd have to face Sarah in court, that I'd have to look at my daughter while describing how she'd betrayed me. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with a kind of perfect spring weather that felt like a mockery of the darkness we were about to wade through. Patricia drove me to the courthouse, holding my hand during the entire drive. Dorothy and several other members of the support group were already there when we arrived, a showing of solidarity that made tears prick at my eyes. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh institutional quality. The prosecutor's table was on the left, the defense on the right, and the judge's bench loomed above it all like a silent arbiter of truth. Sarah was already seated at the defense table when I entered. She wore a conservative navy suit that I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup minimal. She looked younger than her 32 years, almost fragile, which I suspected was entirely intentional. When our eyes met, she looked away quickly, but not before I caught something in her expression that might have been shame or might have been annoyance at being caught. Her attorney, a slick-looking man named David Brennan, was exactly the type Rebecca had warned me about. Expensive suit, practiced smile, the kind of confidence that came from winning cases by making victims feel small. The hearing began with Rebecca outlining the prosecution's case. She described the scope of Sarah's operation, the number of victims, the amount of money involved, and the deliberate nature of the manipulation. She called Detective Morrison to testify about the evidence seized from Sarah's apartment and the larger network of individuals involved in the scheme. Then it was my turn to take the stand. I walked to the witness box on legs that felt like they might give out, raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. Looking out at the courtroom, I saw Sarah watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Patricia in the gallery giving me an encouraging nod. Dorothy and the others from the support group, their faces reflecting the same trauma I was about to describe. Rebecca began with basic questions establishing my identity and relationship to Sarah. Then she moved into the substance of my testimony. Mrs. Chun, can you describe for the court what happened in March when your daughter Sarah came to your home? I took a deep breath and began to speak. I described that rainy Tuesday afternoon, Sarah's tears, her apparent terror, the screenshots she'd shown me of threatening messages. I described the 3 days we'd spent deleting my digital presence, how Sarah had insisted on thoroughness, how she'd stressed the urgency of removing every trace of me from the internet. And during this time, did you give Sarah access to your social media accounts? Yes, I replied. She helped me navigate the deletion process. She logged into my accounts to make sure everything was being deleted properly. She had my passwords, my email access, everything. Did you have any reason at that time to suspect your daughter's motives? None whatsoever. She's my only child. She'd been so supportive after my husband died. I trusted her completely. Rebecca then introduced evidence of the websites where my photos had been sold, the user statistics showing how many people had downloaded my images, the comprehensive profile that detailed my daily routines. She showed the judge Sarah's seller account, the spreadsheets documenting her victims, the chat logs where she discussed me as a target. Mrs. Chun, when you discovered what your daughter had done, can you describe your emotional response? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just that strangers had access to my photos. It was that my own daughter had turned me into a product. She'd calculated my worth in dollars and cents. She'd studied my vulnerabilities and exploited them. Every memory I'd shared on social media, every moment of my life with my late husband, every private piece of myself had been packaged and sold to anyone willing to pay. And she'd done it all while looking me in the eye and pretending to care about my safety. My voice cracked on the last words, but I refused to cry. I wanted Sarah to see my strength, not my pain. Rebecca continued her questioning, having me walk through the discovery process, my decision to press charges, the impact this had on my ability to trust others. Then she yielded to David Brennan for cross-examination. Sarah's attorney stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Mrs. Chun, I'm sorry for what you've been through. Nobody is disputing that this situation is unfortunate, but I need to ask you some questions to clarify a few points. He approached the witness stand with what I assumed was meant to be a sympathetic expression. Mrs. Chun, isn't it true that all of the photos Sarah allegedly sold were photos you had voluntarily posted on public social media platforms? I had posted them on my personal accounts, yes, but they weren't public in the sense that anyone could access them. My Instagram account had privacy settings. My Facebook was limited to friends. But you did share them online, correct? You made the decision to put these images on the internet? I shared them with people I knew in spaces I controlled. There's a difference between sharing photos with friends and having them archived and sold to strangers. Brennan smiled slightly, as if I'd played into his hands. But once something is on the internet, Mrs. Chun, it's never truly private, is it? You've heard the saying that the internet is forever? Rebecca objected immediately. Relevance, Your Honor. Whether Mrs. Chun should have known her social media posts could be archived doesn't change the fact that the defendant deliberately manipulated her into deleting those accounts for the specific purpose of profiting from archived content. The judge sustained the objection, but Brennan had made his point. He wanted to suggest that I bore some responsibility for my own victimization simply by participating in social media. He continued his cross-examination, trying to minimize the severity of Sarah's actions by focusing on technicalities. Had I suffered any physical harm? Had I lost money directly? Could I prove that any of the people who'd purchased access to my photos had actually used them for malicious purposes? I answered each question truthfully, acknowledging that no, I hadn't been physically harmed, and no, I couldn't prove malicious use. But that didn't change the fundamental violation of what Sarah had done. Mrs. Chun, isn't it possible that my client genuinely believed you were in danger from online harassment and was trying to help you, and only later made the poor decision to monetize the archived content? No, I said firmly. The timeline doesn't support that. She uploaded my photos to those websites before I even deleted my accounts. She was planning this from the beginning. The harassment story was a lie designed to manipulate me into making myself vulnerable. Brennan tried a few more approaches, but I held firm. Rebecca had prepared me well, and I refused to let him twist my victimization into some sort of shared responsibility. When the cross-examination ended, I was dismissed from the stand. Walking back to my seat, I caught Sarah's eye again. This time she didn't look away. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something like regret flash across her face. But then it was gone, replaced by the carefully neutral expression she'd worn throughout the hearing. The judge heard testimony from two other victims that day. Dorothy described how she discovered her late husband's photos being used in fake charity scams. A man named Richard explained how his daughter had convinced him to delete his Facebook account, claiming it was making him depressed, only to profit from his archived photos of his grandchildren. By the end of the hearing, the judge had heard enough. He ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and set a court date for September. Sarah remained free on bail, but the conditions were tightened. She was now required to wear an ankle monitor and couldn't leave the state. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. The case had attracted media attention because it highlighted a growing problem of digital exploitation that affected thousands of people, but rarely resulted in criminal charges. Rebecca had warned me this might happen and coached me on how to handle it. I made a brief statement to the cameras. What my daughter did wasn't just illegal, it was a betrayal of the most fundamental kind. She exploited my trust and my love to turn me into a commodity. I'm pressing charges not for revenge, but because what she did to me, she did to dozens of others. We deserve justice, and we deserve recognition that our privacy and our dignity have value that can't be measured in dollars. The reporters shouted questions as Patricia guided me toward her car, but I didn't answer any of them. I'd said what needed to be said. That evening, alone in my townhouse, I found myself thinking about the question David Brennan had implied but never quite asked directly. Why had Sarah done this? What had driven my daughter to see me and people like me as nothing more than exploitable resources? I thought back over our relationship, trying to identify warning signs I might have missed. Sarah had always been ambitious, always focused on success and advancement. After Michael died, she'd been supportive, but I realized now that her support had often felt performative, like she was going through the motions of being a good daughter rather than genuinely connecting with me. Had she resented me? Had she seen my modest lifestyle and limited income as embarrassing? Had she viewed my simple pleasures, my painting, my social media posts, my quiet widowhood, as pathetic rather than peaceful? Or had it been simpler than that? Had she just seen an opportunity and taken it, calculating that the money was worth more than maintaining a relationship with her mother? I'd never get satisfying answers to these questions, I realized. Whatever Sarah's motivations, they'd led her to make choices that severed our relationship irrevocably. Even if she was somehow acquitted, even if she served her sentence and was released, we could never go back to what we'd been. That mother-daughter relationship had died the moment she typed my name into a website and assigned me a price tag. The support group continued to meet every Tuesday, and I found myself looking forward to those sessions more than I would have thought possible. We were an unlikely community bound together by shared trauma, but we were genuine in ways my relationship with Sarah never had been. We supported each other through the various stages of our legal cases, celebrated small victories, and provided comfort during setbacks. Dorothy became a particularly close friend. We started meeting for lunch on Thursdays, taking walks through Portland's parks, visiting art galleries together. She was a retired teacher who shared my love of watercolor painting, and we began attending a weekly painting class together at the community center. One afternoon in July, as we sat by the river painting the bridge that spanned the water, Dorothy said something that shifted my entire perspective. You know what the worst part is? It's not what they took from us. It's that they made us afraid to be visible, to share our lives, to trust people with our stories. They wanted us to disappear, to hide, to make ourselves small. And I refused to do that anymore. Her words resonated deeply. Sarah had tried to erase me, to reduce me to archive data that could be bought and sold. But I was still here. Still painting, still making friends, still living my life on my own terms. And I realized that the best revenge wasn't conviction or punishment, though those mattered. The best revenge was refusing to disappear, refusing to let what Sarah had done diminish me. I started posting my paintings online again, not on Instagram or Facebook, but on a personal website Patricia's grandson Tyler helped me create. I watermarked every image and included copyright information, but I shared my work because my art was part of who I was. I wasn't going to let Sarah's betrayal silence me. I reconnected with old friends from my teaching days, having coffee dates and dinner parties. I joined a book club at the library. I started volunteering at a literacy program for adults. I built a life that was fuller and more connected than what I'd had before, when I'd been so dependent on Sarah for emotional sustenance. The preliminary hearing had shown me something important. I wasn't alone in this fight. There were dozens of other victims, hundreds of people in support groups, thousands who'd experienced similar violations of privacy and trust. We were building a community of survivors who refused to be reduced to data points or dollar signs. As September approached and the trial date loomed, I felt ready. Not eager exactly, because facing Sarah in court would still be painful, but ready to tell my story, to stand with the other victims, to insist that what had been done to us mattered and deserved consequences. Rebecca called me a week before the trial to give me an update. Sarah's defense team had approached her about a possible plea deal. They wanted to avoid trial, likely because they knew the evidence was overwhelming and a jury would be sympathetic to the victims. What kind of plea deal? I asked. They're offering to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for a shorter sentence. Probably 5 to 7 years instead of the 15 to 20 she's facing if convicted on all counts. What do you think I should do? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Ultimately, it's not just your decision. There are 43 victims in this case and they all have a say. But I'll tell you what I tell all victims in this situation. A trial is unpredictable. Even with strong evidence, juries can be swayed. A plea deal guarantees conviction and ensures she faces some consequences. But it also means you won't get your day in court, won't get to fully confront what she did in a public forum. I thought about it for several days, discussing it with Patricia, with Dorothy, with Dr. Rodriguez and the support group. In the end, most of us agreed that we preferred the certainty of a plea deal over the risk of a trial that might not result in conviction. Sarah pleaded guilty in mid-September to multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and computer crimes. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all victims, though given her financial situation, none of us expected to see much of that money. The sentencing hearing was the last time I saw my daughter. She made a brief statement before the judge handed down the sentence, her voice shaking as she read from a prepared document. I know what I did was wrong. I betrayed people who trusted me, including my own mother. I was drowning in debt and made choices I can never take back. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. The words rang hollow. They felt coached by her attorney, designed to generate sympathy rather than express genuine remorse. There was no explanation, no real acknowledgement of the calculated nature of her crimes. Just a vague admission of wrongdoing followed by excuses about debt. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood and faced Sarah directly. You didn't just betray my trust. You taught me that the person I thought I knew never really existed. The daughter I loved, the child I raised, she was already gone before you walked into my house that day with your manufactured tears and fake concern. I don't know when I lost her or if I ever really had her. But I know that the person sitting at that table isn't my daughter anymore. She's a stranger who wears my daughter's face. And I'm done mourning someone who was never really there. Sarah's face crumpled as I spoke, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I felt nothing watching her cry. Those tears were as meaningless as the ones she'd shed to manipulate me into deleting my social media accounts. I cried all the tears I was going to cry for Sarah Chun. The woman she'd been, or the woman I believed she was, deserved my grief. The person she actually turned out to be deserved only my indifference. After the sentencing, the other victims and I gathered outside the courthouse. The media was there again, but this time we were ready. Dorothy had suggested we make a joint statement, something that highlighted not just what had been done to us but what we'd built in response. We stood together, 43 victims who'd been targeted because someone thought we were isolated, vulnerable, and easy to exploit. And Dorothy spoke for all of us. We're here today not as victims but as survivors. What was done to us was meant to erase us, to reduce us to products that could be bought and sold. But we refused to disappear. We found each other. We built a community. We fought back. And we're still here, still living our lives, still refusing to be silent. Our privacy was violated, our trust was betrayed, but our dignity remains intact. And that's something no one can take from us or sell to the highest bidder. The statement was picked up by news outlets across the country. Suddenly our case wasn't just about Sarah and her crimes. It became part of a larger conversation about digital privacy, exploitation of vulnerable populations, and the need for stronger legal protections in the age of data harvesting. Several of us were invited to speak at conferences about digital rights. Dorothy and I were interviewed for a documentary about online exploitation. Rebecca used our case as the basis for proposed legislation that would strengthen privacy protections and increase penalties for those who profited from manipulating vulnerable people into surrendering their digital privacy. What Sarah had meant as erasure became visibility. What she'd intended as exploitation became empowerment. We'd taken her attempt to commodify us and transformed it into a platform for advocacy. 6 months after Sarah's sentencing, I stood in front of a room full of legislators at the state capitol, testifying in favor of the privacy protection bill that had been inspired by our case. I described what Sarah had done, the manipulation, the betrayal, the violation. But I also described what we'd built in response, the community of survivors who'd refused to be silenced. The bill passed unanimously. It wouldn't undo what had been done to us, but it would make it harder for others to experience the same exploitation. It was named the Digital Privacy Protection Act, but those of us who'd fought for it called it something else. We called it the Survivors' Bill because it existed because we'd survived and refused to disappear. Looking back now, a year after discovering what Sarah had done, I can see how fundamentally my life has changed. Not just in the obvious ways, the broken relationship with my daughter, the legal battles, the media attention, but in deeper, more meaningful ways. I'm no longer the woman who lived quietly and alone, dependent on a single relationship for emotional connection. I have a whole community now. Friends who understand what I've been through. A purpose beyond just getting through each day. A voice that matters in conversations about privacy and exploitation. I've started teaching watercolor classes at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the confidence to pursue. My students are mostly older adults like me, people who'd given up on creative pursuits and were rediscovering them in retirement. Teaching them feels like reclaiming something Sarah tried to take from me. The joy of sharing beauty and creativity without fear of exploitation. Patricia and I have started traveling together, taking short trips to art museums and galleries along the West Coast. Tyler taught me how to use my new smartphone camera and helped me set up a photography account on a platform with strong privacy protections. I document our travels not for anyone else's validation, but because capturing beauty brings me joy. Dorothy and I are writing a book together about our experiences. Not just the exploitation and betrayal, but the recovery and community building that came after. We want other victims to know they're not alone, that survival is possible, that life can be rich and meaningful even after profound betrayal. The support group still meets every Tuesday, though the composition has changed as some members have moved on and new victims have joined. I've become one of the facilitators now, helping newer members process their trauma and find their way toward healing. It's meaningful work that makes me feel connected to something larger than myself. I think about Sarah sometimes, though less frequently as time passes. She's serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility about 2 hours away. I've received several letters from her, all forwarded through Rebecca per the conditions of a restraining order I took out. Haven't opened any of them. Whatever Sarah wants to say to me now comes too late and costs too much. Maybe someday I'll be ready to read her words. Maybe there will come a time when enough distance and healing have occurred that I can face whatever explanations or apologies she wants to offer. But that time isn't now. Right now, I'm focused on building a life that's authentically mine, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide them. The scars remain. I'm more cautious now about what I share online and with whom. I have trust issues that I'm working through in therapy. There are moments when I'm hit with waves of grief for the daughter I thought I had, for the relationship that never really existed in the form I believed it did. But I'm also stronger than I was before. More connected, more purposeful, more aware of my own worth and less willing to accept treatment that diminishes it. Sarah tried to reduce me to a dollar value, to a collection of data points that could be packaged and sold. Instead, she inadvertently showed me that I'm worth far more than she could ever quantify. My life now is richer in the ways that actually matter. Real friendships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Creative pursuits that bring me joy. Advocacy work that gives me purpose. A community of people who understand both the darkness of what we've experienced and the light we've built in response. Sarah took my photos, my personal information, my sense of safety and trust. But she couldn't take my resilience, my capacity for growth, or my ability to build something meaningful from the rubble of what she destroyed. Those things were never hers to sell, and they remain entirely mine. Standing in my studio this evening, working on a watercolor of the Portland Harbor at sunset, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but contentment. Peace. A sense that despite everything that's happened, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The painting takes shape under my brush, layers of color building depth and complexity. It's a metaphor I don't miss. Like this painting, my life now has more depth than it did before. The shadows make the light more meaningful. The dark colors give context to the bright ones. What seemed like destruction was actually transformation. I'll never thank Sarah for what she did. Her actions were cruel, calculated, and unforgivable. But I can acknowledge that I've become someone stronger and more whole through surviving them. I've found my voice, my community, my purpose. I've learned that I'm more resilient than I ever knew, more valuable than anyone's price tag could indicate. Tomorrow, Dorothy and I are meeting with a group of younger women who've experienced similar privacy violations. They're looking for guidance, for hope, for evidence that recovery is possible. We'll share our stories, offer support, and help them understand that what happened to them doesn't define their future. This is who I am now. Not a victim, but a survivor. Not a product to be sold, but a person with inherent worth and dignity. Not erased, but more visible and vocal than ever before. Sarah tried to delete me from the internet and from relevance. Instead, she gave me a platform and a purpose that I never would have found on my own. The irony isn't lost on me. My daughter tried to profit from my invisibility, and instead created conditions for me to become more seen than I'd ever been. She wanted me silent and instead gave me a reason to speak. She attempted erasure and achieved the opposite. As I clean my brushes and prepare to end my painting session for the evening, I think about the title I'll give this piece. I decide to call it Emergence, because that's what this past year has been. An emergence from isolation into community, from victimhood into advocacy, from erasure into visibility, from the daughter who tried to delete me into the woman I've become despite her efforts. Sarah is in prison serving time for her crimes, but I'm free in ways I never was before. Free from the illusion that blood relation guarantees loyalty. Free from the belief that I need to make myself small to be loved. Free from the fear that being visible makes me vulnerable. I am visible now, deliberately and defiantly so. And no one can take that visibility away or profit from it without my consent. That's the real victory here. Not Sarah's conviction or the legislation that bears our names. The real victory is that I reclaimed ownership of my own story and my own life. This is my story. Mine to tell, mine to own, mine to share on my terms. And no one, not even my daughter, can take that away from me. 2 years have passed since that courtroom sentencing, and I barely recognize the woman I was when Sarah first walked through my door with her manufactured tears. That version of me existed in a smaller world, bounded by grief and loneliness, vulnerable in ways I didn't understand until someone exploited them. This morning I received notification that Sarah is eligible for parole next month. Her lawyer sent the standard documentation through proper channels, requesting that I submit a statement regarding her potential release. I sat with that notification for several hours, letting old emotions surface and examining them like artifacts from another life. There's no anger anymore. That burned away somewhere in the second year, replaced by something closer to acceptance. Sarah made her choices and faced consequences. Whether she serves 4 years or the full 6 changes nothing about my life now. I've built something she can never touch again. I wrote my statement to the parole board with clear eyes and steady hands. I didn't argue against her release. I simply stated facts. What she did, how it impacted me, the community we built in response. I noted that I maintain a restraining order and have no desire for contact. I wished her well in rebuilding her life while making clear that rebuilding would happen without me in it. Patricia read my statement before I submitted it and squeezed my hand. "You've come so far," she said. "I'm proud of who you've become through this." Her words meant more than she probably realized. As I am proud too. Proud of the advocacy work, the friendships, the art I create without fear. Proud that I transformed attempted erasure into amplified voice. Dorothy and I finished our book last month. The publisher believes it will help countless people navigating similar betrayals. We dedicated it to all survivors who refused to disappear, who built community from isolation, who found strength in shared trauma. The support group continues meeting every Tuesday. I'm no longer the newest member processing fresh wounds. I'm the one welcoming others, offering hope through my own healing, proving that life continues and even flourishes after profound betrayal. Tomorrow I'm teaching my watercolor class, then having dinner with friends from the book club. Next week Dorothy and I leave for a painting retreat in Northern California. My calendar is full of genuine connections, creative pursuits, meaningful work. This is the life Sarah tried to delete. Instead, her actions forced me to build something better than what existed before. I still paint the Portland Harbor at sunset, But now those paintings sell in a local gallery. Each one is properly copyrighted, watermarked, protected. Each one represents my refusal to hide, to shrink, to let betrayal silence my creative voice. Sarah wanted to profit from making me invisible. Instead, she gave me every reason to ensure I'd never be invisible again. That's my final victory. Not her imprisonment, but my emergence. I am here. I am visible. I am valued. And my story belongs entirely to me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.